Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry, vertically challenged. There we go. Welcome back from lunch. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Because I am the speaker after lunch, I'm going to start with a story. First, we need to get the slides. Okay, well, we missed the first couple slides, so that's okay. There we go. And there we are. So, glitches out of the way. I want to talk about a little story about why it made me so excited to work on community benefit plans when I came to the Department of Energy. Oh, we're not there yet. I didn't touch anything. So I'll tell the story while we figure this stuff out. So in my previous position before coming to Department of Energy, I was working on community microgrids in California and general energy resilience projects. And so there was one project I came on board. They had just won an award from the California Energy Commission to do this amazing community microgrid. All of the homes involved, as a whole block, a city block. Everyone was gonna get a minimum of $100,000 worth of free stuff on their house. Their electricity bills were gonna go way down. They were gonna have energy storage so they wouldn't suffer brownouts or blackouts. It was gonna be amazing. And they had done this 4-year study beforehand to be able to win the award. And they studied this particular block. So I came in, my first week, we were hosting a community meeting for the lucky winners of this project. And we had probably 50 people in the room, and our scientists were going through, and guess what you've won, Bob? And gone through all of the free stuff that these people were gonna get in their homes, the whole block. And they were like this. The 4-letter words that were coming out of their eyes were incredible. We could not convince these people to do this project, despite all of the stuff that they were gonna get. The reason why, they didn't trust it. They didn't trust us. We hadn't engaged them from the very beginning, and so they turned down this whole thing because we had not engaged the community at the get-go. And so, further down the project, we ended up backing out, finding a different area, had a competitive process, got buy-in from the very beginning. Voila, project is starting. Then we had worker supply issues because it was COVID, and we couldn't get the right workers for the project. Delay. But because of all these delays, normal projects, they might fail because the human subjects would back out. Oh, it's taking too long, we don't want to do this. But because we got buy-in at the very beginning, they were willing to work with us and stayed with it. And the project is still ongoing, but successfully going. So for me, having gone through that and then coming to DOE and hearing about this requirement for DOE funding opportunities, it made a lot of sense to me when we're talking about project risk, mitigating project risk, and ensuring project success. So, why does the DOE require community benefit plans? Well, we want to ensure broad-based prosperity, and we want to mitigate project risk, right? So we want to make sure that these taxpayer dollars that are going into communities benefit everyone in the community, not just the awardee. We want to reduce project risk and delays. We want to decrease health and safety risks. That's a part of our CBPs. We are increasing participation of stakeholders in decision-making processes. This is not top-down, this is bottom-up. And we want to increase accountability to the workers and the people that are in these communities, right? Too many folks in the past have been borne the burden of energy infrastructure instead of benefiting from it. Wow, okay, we're moving right along on my slides here. So, there was something. What is a community benefit plan? Thank you. I'm not touching this yet. Should I just say next slide? Okay. So next slide. What is in these community benefit plans? So there are 4 components, and I apologize if all of you guys know this already, but there's always a few people in the room who don't, so we're starting from the beginning. So we have 4 categories of the community benefit plans. One is community and labor engagement, where we're doing meaningful engagement with communities, two-way communication, and ensuring that there are voices in decision-making processes. We have investing in quality workers, quality jobs, making sure that you can recruit and retain skilled workers for these projects. Then we have our diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, which is making sure that these good opportunities are accessible to everyone and not just a limited pool of people. And last is Justice 40, which is making sure that 40% of certain federal benefits flow to disadvantaged communities. Next slide. So a big overview. CBPs are typically evaluated at 20% of the overall merit score for an application. This is not for every single funding opportunity announcement, but this is the general application of it. If the project is selected, the community benefits plan then is negotiated with the DOE. Some things might be changed. It's free-flowing negotiation on all parts of the award, including the CBP. Then it's included in the contract documents at the end, and the awardee is expected to live up to their promises and commitments that they've made in the CBP. The CBP has to have at least one SMART milestone per budget period, so that's specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-based. So you're gonna hear the word specific from me a lot. Just if you take nothing else away, you need to be specific in your community benefit plan. Next slide. So this is an awfully busy slide. I apologize for that. But it contains a lot of really juicy stuff. So this is what y'all are here for, what makes an effective CBP. So this is generally speaking, but there are additional slides that go into each pillar of the CBP. These slides are all gonna be available on our website. So just in case you don't have to go like this to read your words, don't worry, this is all gonna be posted very shortly. So it's important that CBPs go beyond high-level statements, kind of promises to the universe, things that are not specific, right? We want specific obligations. The other thing you need to know is that there's no one-size-fits-all here. Like, we've been asked before, like, well, what does the community benefit nomenclature? Like, what does a benefit mean? Well, this is place-based, right? So this is it's not what it means to DOE, what a community benefit is. What does it mean to the community itself? What do they need? What's important to them? So making sure that that is part and parcel of your CBP is really important. SMART milestones, again, clear metrics to measure success. You're gonna be evaluated on this as the project goes on. So you want really clear metrics so that you know what your goals are. They're supposed to be integrated with the project. So things we've seen before are promises or commitments in a CBP that have nothing to do with the project itself. That is really not what we're looking for. We want it to be very related to the project. We want to identify sufficient resources to carry out the commitments made in the CBP. So we're going to have, X number of community meetings. We have this person at our company who is 10% time to be doing community engagement, or hopefully far more than 10% of their time, but a percentage of time dedicated to this. And making commitments to consider possible impacts to workers and communities. So always thinking, how does this impact others? And also offer a substantive analysis and quantitative analysis of the impacts to local communities. So next slide. So now we're gonna dig a little bit more into the specific pillars of the CBP and kind of go through the same exercise as like what kind of questions should you be asking and what does an effective commitment in this category look like? So let's fast forward. There we go. So guiding questions to develop your CBP. So it's a series of questions to ask yourself to kind of start framing out your community benefits plan. So how will you identify impacted stakeholders? This is sort of like step one, and maybe you guys have already talked about how you identify stakeholders, but making sure you're reaching really broadly, because it's not just one group of people that you're affecting, it's a really broad group. The thing is you don't want to have your project nearly done or nearly ready to break ground, and some stakeholder group comes out of nowhere. And you're like, I can't believe we didn't engage these people right away. Because what you're trying to do is preempt harm, establish relationships so that your project gets done. And then you identify the specific community groups, labor groups that would be impacted, right? So first is making sure you're casting a wide net, then identifying these stakeholder groups, and then you have to talk to them first. we do check when we're reading applications. If people say they have engaged a tribe and the tribe is part of their application, we will contact the tribe and say, do y'all know about this? And sadly, surprisingly, oftentimes we hear, no, we don't know about that. Please tell us more. That's a very unfortunate situation that nobody wants to find themselves in. So actual engagement prior to. We understand that sometimes, and this applies to this section and other sections as well, it's sometimes hard to engage folks when something is an idea and not a real project, right? People are applying to the Department of Energy to get funding to do something really interesting and important, and it's hard to get stakeholders excited and engaged on something that may or may not happen. So that we understand that that's a sticky wicket. So if there are sensitivities there, we understand, just put that in. We've identified these stakeholder groups, but since this may or may not happen, we have not engaged them yet. It's just, we gotta know you're thinking about it and that you've really done your homework. Then in terms of ongoing community engagement, setting out your timeline. What is a timeline for these meetings? What do they look like? How are you gonna make sure people can go to the meetings? Are you gonna have them after work hours, before work hours? Are you gonna have childcare so that people can bring their children and still participate? What are the barriers to people participating and how do you intend to address them? That's really important too. And then talking about negotiated agreements. So have you thought about or considered or have an MOU or already signed some sort of negotiated agreement, like a community benefit agreement, a project labor agreement, collective bargaining agreement, community workforce agreement? There's a whole slew of these things. And we'll map them out in a little bit. Next slide. So here's some examples of effective commitments. Thinking about how these ongoing relationships are going to be governed and how you're going to have accountability for the commitments. So ideally, a CBP would establish a stakeholder engagement plan and a strategy to allow stakeholders to meaningfully engage in the project. And strengthening this feedback loop are these negotiated agreements that I've talked about. You will notice that I say negotiated agreement frequently. This is on purpose, just saying. Next slide, please. Another important part of this sort of feedback loop and kind of creating accountability here is establishing community advisory boards, which is not on this slide, but wanted to say. So it's a more formal way of having community engagement that has governance and accountability rules built into those boards. So types of negotiated agreements, I wanted to differentiate between community benefits agreements and community benefits plans. So the plans are what you're using to apply for a DOE award. The community benefit agreement is the agreement between the project developer and the community to create that accountability and feedback loop. So we have all these kind of things that are great ways to have an effective, this is General Counsel telling me this is the word I have to say, to have an effective community benefit plan. Moving on, next slide. Now we're going to talk about the investing in quality jobs section. Next slide. So the investing in quality jobs section is really about the creation and retention of quality jobs. So the Department of Labor actually has a great, sorry, I'm used to moving around a lot when I talk, so I'm feeling very hemmed in here. Department of Labor has a great definition of what is a good job. So I encourage you guys to look at that in your own time if you're having trouble sleeping. But when we're talking about it, we're using their nomenclature, so paying high wages, competitive benefits, a workplace devoid of harassment, health and safety controls, and where workers have a free and fair choice to join a union. So this is the crux of the section and what we're really looking for. Next slide. So again, guiding questions to help you develop your CBP. Will you pay workers wages that are above average or in the upper quartile for location and occupation? Will you work with apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs? Are your operations workers and hourly workers engaged in health and safety committees? Do you participate in collective bargaining agreements? Or do you have a policy to remain neutral during a union negotiation? Are you considering a project labor agreement? And if not, what is your plan for workforce continuity? And how will you minimize risks of labor disputes and disruptions? So, talking a little bit more about why this section is important, it's because we want to make sure that every project that we fund has available skilled workers to complete the project on time. This is a risk mitigation tool. The way you make sure you have workers is you pay them well, competitively, you train them well, and you give them opportunities to feel successful in their position and advance. You make sure that they can get to work, that they have childcare, that they have transportation, that they have elder care. All of these things wrap up into keeping employees on the job site to get the job done, and then to continue operating the facility once it's complete. So that's the whole mindset behind the section. Next slide. So this is a really boring one, sorry, but very wordy. So these for operations phase jobs, there's the distinction between operations phase jobs and construction phase jobs. So operations phase jobs are, the folks who are working in the plant or facility to make it run. So again, a lot of this comes back to unions, allowing union workers access to non-work spaces for meetings, pledge to remain neutral in any union negotiations, paying above prevailing wage, good benefits, healthcare, transportation, et cetera, paid tuition for training. Like, not a lot of people think about paid tuition for training, but it's really important. Like, how are you going to advance in your career if you need to take time off to do the training and then you don't get paid, but you still have to pay your rent and feed your kids? So that's something that's really important to consider. Next slide. So for construction phase jobs, the project labor agreement is really the kind of most effective tool to ensure that you have the workers that you need to complete a project. In the absence of that, we do ask that you would create a workforce continuity plan. There's rules around that, parameters, has to be a certain size project, et cetera, that just lays out your plan for making sure you're gonna have the workers to do the job. It's a fair question if you're getting lots of millions of dollars. Other effective commitments for this section are to use registered apprenticeship or engage with pre-apprenticeship programs, commitment to local hire, commitment to reach out to underrepresented groups, to hire from those unrepresented groups, and to pay above prevailing wage. Next slide, please. Now we're going to turn to the diversity, equity, and inclusion accessibility. So this section is about encouraging the participation of underrepresented groups in these projects. Ensuring equitable access to these opportunities and these good paying jobs is really important to this administration. So partnerships are really important. Partnerships with community benefit organizations, minority serving institutions, women-owned businesses. These kinds of partnerships are really important. Next slide. So, important questions to get you started. Do you plan to specifically identify minority serving institutions or community benefit organizations that you plan to partner with for this project? So again, like, naming the organizations that you're going to work with instead of just repeating back to us, we will engage minority serving institutions. Well, who are they? Tell us, please. We would like to know. Have you reached out to workforce training organizations? And particularly ones that serve underrepresented populations. For example, the returning citizens or formerly incarcerated. Have you identified robust and inclusive workforce development investments and supportive services as part of the project? Do you work with apprenticeship readiness programs and registered apprenticeships? It's all starting to sound the same, but yes, that is what we're looking for. So I want to make it really clear here that this is very different than a corporate DEIA plan, where you're just kind of like, we do diversity hires. That's not what we want. We want it project specific. How are you going to make sure DEIA is thought about in this project? We've seen a lot of really interesting things here, which I'll give you an example. So on the slide, you can see examples of effective commitments that kind of go along the same lines of what I talked about, partnering with apprenticeship programs, apprenticeship utilization programs. There's an example, programs with K through 12 school systems, I'll give you an example of a real one that I saw on an application, which was, they were so excited about it, and I felt so bad to ding them, but they were like, 5 years ago, we sponsored a field trip for 5th graders to visit a local dairy farm. This was for an industrial decarbonization project. I can't help them. There's no connection. Like, don't even. So again, has to be, if you're doing K through 12 programs, are you doing STEM for girls that prepare them to stay living in the town where they grew up to work at the factory where you're doing your project, right? That is a natural cognitive step. So again, hiring local workers, reaching out, doing outreach to minority serving institutions. You can't just kind of put out an ad and expect to reach underrepresented populations because they have issues with communication, there's barriers, there's all kinds of things. You have to do active outreach and engage them. Next slide, because I want to have time for questions, so I'm going to whiz bang through some of this stuff. The Justice 40 section, which I shouldn't go through very quickly, but this is where we want to make sure that 40% of overall federal investments go to disadvantaged communities. We're doing this section because there are concerns that DOE-funded infrastructure could add further burdens to communities that have already suffered in the past. Folks are concerned that jobs and financial opportunities won't go to the people that live there. The advisory boards won't have meaningful input to projects. Fence line communities won't be engaged, but rather be harmed by the project. And that benefits desired by communities won't be in the CBPs. So these are kinds of things that we want to prevent by having these Justice 40 commitments. Next slide, please. So this section, you need to be identifying specific communities that will be impacted. You need to identify those impacts, both positive and negative. You need to have quantitative measuring of the impacts as well, and have clear and responsible metrics for tracking impacts. So with that, to wrap things up, next slide. So you've heard generally that we're looking for specific commitments that are related to the project. We understand that everyone can be in different parts of their project planning, and it might not be the right time for you to sign a PLA or to sign a community benefit agreement, but a commitment to say, we are going to work with these 5 community organizations to ultimately sign a community benefit agreement. That is something that we're looking for because it means you're thinking about it, you're willing to commit to the process. It's just not time to actually sign agreements yet. We are working on a lot of resources for you guys. CBP 1.0 has passed. We skipped over 2.0. We're on 3.0 now. So part of the slides that I showed today are going to be posted on our website very, very soon. The CBP 101 series is going to be 5 chapters. So this was a very condensed version of what we're going to be posting. We're going to have, what is a PLA? What is a community benefit agreement? We're going to have one-pagers on all the different types of agreements so that you can educate yourselves a little bit more on what it is we're talking about. We are working very hard to make things more transparent and more accountable. Please watch for that. I'm not allowed to say more, but we are really working hard to get information out in the selection phase. So once a company has been selected, we would like to be able to name the company that's been selected and the location of work. And then our community outreach office will contact those communities and give them a heads up so that they can engage proactively. And then also once a company's been awarded, we are working to post their CBP in a public place or their contractual obligations in a public place so that they can be held accountable to the communities in which they work. So lots of things coming very soon. And with that, I will open it up to questions. I'm here all day.
From the community perspective, I mean, I've talked to communities who suddenly have a private industry at their door saying, you know, we need a community benefit plan, and they don't even know what that is. So I'm thrilled to hear that you're going to be putting out the 101 series. When will that come out, and will it have examples of what other communities have asked for and received? Because a lot of the times when I talk to communities, one of the questions is, we don't really even know what is acceptable to ask. And then my second part of that question is, when they get down to a community benefit agreement, another concern that I hear from communities is, where is the teeth in that agreement? If they've already received the grant funding, where does the accountability come in? And could you maybe speak to that, some examples of some good and maybe creative ways that communities have done that?
Okay, so the first question, specific examples of what this looks like in real life. I have created content for that. I hope that it will be posted, but it's very hard to be able to post real life examples when you're the Department of Energy. So I hear you, and we're working on it. The 101 series will be issued chapter by chapter. Chapter 1 is done, and hopefully will be posted by the end of this week. And the others will be coming shortly thereafter, but hopefully by September. So the second part of the question is the accountability. You know, one of the reasons why we like community benefit agreements and these other negotiated agreements with third parties is because it takes DOE out of the mix for the accountability, because, you know, it's very hard for us to really enforce every single provision of a community benefit agreement. We're not a party to it. But the milestone promises that folks have made in their CBP do become part of the contract with DOE. So if they are not fulfilling those parts of their contract, we do have an option to have further conversations with them about why they are unable to fulfill those commitments and how might they be able to. So that is where we have our teeth, and a lot of programs that we run have milestone grants. So it's sort of like you get a little bump in the beginning and then some more money later, and they have go, no go stages. So we use a lot of different information to decide, like, are we gonna continue with this or are we not gonna continue with this? Do you get more money or no? So we have tools at our disposal, but we also hope and expect that the communities in those community agreements will build in accountability. And I think an important point too is that there are philanthropic organizations out there that are helping communities draft these for free. And I would like to post those resources as well, but I might have to rely on a philanthropic entity to post those, so that's not an endorsement. But there are people that will do this for free to build in the appropriate accountability measures in those contracts.
That's awesome. Thank you, and I'd love to know those resources.
Working on them.
Appreciate it.
Sorry, right here. Sorry. So with National Renewable Energy Lab, we've worked with a lot of organizations, states, doing these things. A similar question. We've been asked a ton of times about like real world examples, and I've wondered, is it possible to just opt in? So if someone is applying for a FOA, they can just say, yes, you can publicly publish our community benefit plan if we win. And that way it releases any obligation, any legal constraints, right? And then I have a second quick question is, I've also heard from states specifically, oh, we like these community benefit plans, we should kind of integrate them into what we do. I don't know if you have a specific idea about kind of basically disseminating all your materials specifically to the states for them to adopt similar programs.
Okay, so for the first one, sorry, the second question was so long, I'm trying to remember the first one. It was the waivers. So I am a recovering lawyer myself. So in our new template, by the way, we have a new template for CBPs that is available online on our community benefit, that website. There are so many examples of commitments in there. Like you could literally just go through, I like this one, I like this one, I like this one, and there's a community benefit plan. So I encourage you guys to all look at the new template. It's so much more robust than our old one. It's so much better. But yes, I wrote the waiver myself in the beginning of the new template. But this only applies to things going forward. So we are going back now to awardees and selectees to get their permission to release the information. It's been a job for the interns, but yes, we're doing it. Sorry, and the second question is, we have not actively reached out to people like NASIO or other state-based organizations beyond working with states that are getting like formula grants from us, but still want to incorporate some sort of CBP in their formula grants. But we're very happy to. It just hasn't, limited resources, but would love to do that. And I'm here, you guys, so if you didn't get to ask a question, I'll be around. You can ask me directly.
Okay.